can always be thinner, you can always be hotter, you can always be richer. And so if you never reach a point of satisfaction, you're never satisfied. So I think a lot of people, the first step when we talk about values-based budgeting, they hear deprivation. You have to stop buying things that make you happy. But really what we're saying is, does buying things all the time make you happy? Just think about it for a second.
Hey, journeyers. Welcome to the Journey to Launch podcast. I have a guest that I haven't seen or spoken to in a little bit, so I'm excited to have her on the podcast, Kara Perez, on the show. Let me tell you a little bit about Kara. Kara is the founder of Bravely Go, a sustainability-focused financial education company. Bravely focuses on bringing actionable, intersectional, and accessible financial education to people who never learned the language of money. She's the author of the brand new book, Green Money, which is out now, should be out now by the time this episode airs. Kara has been featured in New York Times, Good Morning America, Forbes, NPR, Glamour, ABC, you name it, basically everywhere. And additionally, for 2 years, she's hosted the award-winning podcast, The Fairer Sense, which I was a guest on. I had the honor to be a guest on. And she has been named just a top money expert and space and voice in this community. I mentioned she was on episode 49 of the podcast. So that was way back in the beginning, but I'm happy to have you back on. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me back, and hello, journeyers.
Hello. So much has happened since you've been on the podcast and shared you had a debt payoff story and starting Bravely Go. And a lot has happened since then, obviously. And so I want to kind of just touch upon your background, because I always find that, you can definitely go listen to episode 49, the original episode, if you want to hear more details. But I think just a quick background into how you got into, talking about money and becoming an entrepreneur, and how you changed your finances. And then we'll get into all the updates.
Yeah. Okay. So the TLDR, I grew up low income, single parent household, 2 siblings. Only one of my siblings to go to college, had to take out student loans to do it, and then graduated in 2011 and was like, money, where is it? Because I don't have it. I've never had it, but now I got these loans and no one seems to want to hire me. I'm 36 today and I've never had a full-time salaried position. Hashtag millennial things. And so I was really low income for the majority of my 20s, and I got really serious about paying off my student loan debt when I was 25. I worked 5 different part-time jobs to do that, and blogged about it. Remember blogs back in the day before social media, and just really fell in love with personal finance, and also really fell in love with changing my own financial life. I mean, watching the debt drop was so invigorating. And then once I had paid off my student loans, I was just at 0. I was like, okay, now I don't have debt, but I don't have any money. So I got very into saving and investing. And I was still talking about it on the internet. And that has kind of snowballed into my financial education business today. So that's my very quick money recap.
Do you remember what year you started your financial journey, the conscious financial journey to pay off debt? And then when you started Bravely Go, what year that was?
Yeah. So the year that I had my quarter life crisis, I was 25. So that was 2013, 2014. And then I officially got the LLC for Bravely Go in January 2017. So that's when I think of the business being born. But I kind of had my financial awakening in 2013, 2014. And that's when I was 2014, 2015. That's when I was paying off my debt and binging personal finance blogs and podcasts and really learning about money.
Do you think, and this I'm going to veer off just a little bit, because I'm wondering, because I started Journey to Launch, the blog, in 2016, and then the podcast in 2017. And, now things are different. I definitely don't feel as connected to who's in the space, with blogs and podcasts, newcomers. But I know that there are people who are us, where we were 10 years ago, who are listening or who are interested in personal finance, and then want to transition into maybe creating content around it and having a business potentially as just a way to express themselves and make money maybe. So do you feel like the landscape now is different, that you could have done the same thing now, and be as successful as you were? Or is it harder now, or is it easier with TikTok and all these other platforms?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I do feel like the landscape is totally different. And I think that's because of the new platforms. predominantly TikTok. Really changing it because when we started, it was much more long form content. I mean, people primarily had blogs, and Twitter was also kind of the main personal finance social media platform. I feel like in 2018, 2019, it started to shift towards Instagram with the introduction of stories and the algorithm changing from chronological to like whatever it is now, like most engaged with. um, and then obviously in 2020, TikTok just blew up with people staying home and being on their phones all the time. So, to answer your question, I do think that anyone starting today in any niche, like personal finance, cooking, whatever, I do think anyone can still kind of blow up and make a career or a business out of it. I just think it's different. Like now it's all short form driven, and that is a very different skill set than like podcasting or YouTubing or blogging. And so you have to know how to like make a hook. You have to be able to show up 4 or 5 times a day on TikTok. You have to be able to make 4 or 5 videos a day. And I also think you have to be very willing to share like hyper details of your life. That's really because people connect to the personal. And if you're not willing to share, especially in the finance space, like exactly how much you make, exactly how you make that money, where you keep the money, what interest rate you're getting on, what investments, I do think it's going to be a little bit harder because people share all of those details now.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's nice to talk to someone kind of who started kind of when I did, and then like there's a shift. And we've talked behind the scenes just about like our business, like and you know keeping up with kind of the change of
Mm-hmm.
the landscape and what people want to see. And so I don't know, I still want to encourage people that if you do have a story to share, and even if you're not you don't feel like you have a talent in short form or want to show up on video, I do think there are still people who want to consume long form content and create those deeper relationships that are not microwavable like content. But I do think it's different. I just find it interesting. So
Mm-hmm. It is different, but it is still possible.
yeah, it definitely is still possible. So I mean, you've been able to create a business that provides you, your lifestyle. And one of the things that you've done recently or over the past years was travel a lot. So I remember you had put up a post on your Instagram about becoming like location independent. You were going to move away with your partner somewhere. So I'd love for you to share that, because if it's one thing journeyers want to do is travel or live different places and experience different things, and you seem to be able to do that. So can you share what that was like?
Yeah. So in May 2022, my partner graduated with his master's. And I was like, okay, babe, this is our moment. Because if we don't go travel now, we'll never do it because you'll get a 9 to 5 job and my business will just like constantly be shifting and hopefully we'll pick up and grow and we'll never have a chunk of time. This is a gift from the universe. And my partner grew up in a family that didn't really travel. He's from Texas. He's from Austin, Texas. And his parents would be like, oh, family trip to San Antonio, which is like 2 hours away. And I grew up in a family that did travel, but not a lot because we were low income. We would go. I grew up outside of Boston, so it would be like, we're going to Philadelphia, we're going to New York, we're going to Concord, New Hampshire. And so international travel definitely had this big allure for both of us. So I spent probably 2 months planning a trip. We traveled for all of June and July 2022. We went to Mexico, Costa Rica, and Colombia, and various places within each country. And we wanted to do that because I'm half Dominican and I really wanted a chance to practice my Spanish. I didn't grow up with my Spanish speaking parent. And so my Spanish is mediocre, I would say. And I was like, let's go to Spanish speaking countries. And we like to hike and be in nature. So it was really cool to be able to go to like Costa Rica and Colombia. They're such beautiful countries. And then we came back, but because my partner thought he would get a job. We came back for August. He applied all August for jobs. And then we were like, hey, you're not getting hired. Like, you're just not getting hired, babe. It's nothing against you. we could live for less if we go back to Colombia. Like we can live off of just my income and some of your savings if we go back to Colombia and we don't travel around. So we went back to Medellin, Colombia, which is awesome. And I strongly recommend everyone visit. And we stayed there for 6 weeks, just living in an apartment and like taking Spanish classes and just living. And so that was a really, really cool experience. And the only reason we came back because he didn't get a job. So that was 2022 still. He didn't get a job until 2023. The only reason we came back is because I have Crohn's disease and I had to get a colonoscopy, not to get too intimate on the podcast, but I had to get a colonoscopy and an MRI, and I couldn't do that abroad. I had to have that done at home. So it was such an incredible experience, and I'm so glad we prioritized it. We saved for about 6 months before we took the trip. He saved 8 grand, I saved 8 grand, so we had $16,000, which was way overkill. We did not need that much, which ended up being great because then we had some money to live off of while he was unemployed.
Yeah, no, actually, I love you brought that. You came back for some healthcare reasons to the States because that's a big concern for people who either want to permanently live or live extendedly in another country. Sometimes, uh, I'll see, oh, some healthcare is cheaper in other places and actually good, but then sometimes I hear like actually the quality is not as the standard of what maybe American standards of quality is. So I think that's all important that people have to consider when they're thinking about where they're going to travel, if they're going to stay there for a long time, and if they have any pre-existing conditions.
Yeah, and I think I want to say I definitely think you can, as an American, get healthcare in Colombia, but we hadn't gotten travel insurance that would have included that. So it would have been, it just would have been more complicated, probably cheaper, honestly, but more complicated to try and find that. And I didn't feel comfortable because I was really sick. I was having a really bad flare up, and I didn't feel comfortable trying to navigate, trying to explain in my broken Spanish, like what my body was experiencing.
Yeah.
So it just made more sense for me to come back. But I do think that like medical tourism is a very valid option for people. I mean, healthcare in the United States is so bananas.
Yeah. Well, you talked about saving up in advance for this. And I guess it would be important to know at that point when you made the decision that you'd do this and you'd start saving, where were you guys with your financial goals at that point? Because I know for some people, like they could still be in debt and just have other financial things happening, but they're like, I want to travel. And so, how do they
Hmm.
prioritize, like, knowing that they have this once in a lifetime chance when there's maybe someone is in between jobs, there's a break, and you can take this opportunity and do something, and or be responsible and not do that thing. Like how do you
Yeah.
balance between those two?
So I live my life, my financial life and my personal life by this philosophy that I like to call financially secure YOLO. I'm very much so someone who advocates for saving and investing, and I swear by values based budgeting, but I'm also keenly aware that we only have one life to live. Like, YOLO is very real. You know? So, what I do and what I have practiced ever since I paid off my debt when I was 27, so 9 years ago, I paid off all my student loans and I was like, okay, I have sacrificed a lot to pay off this debt. Like, I worked 5 different part time jobs. I lived on $10,000 a year. I said no to everything that wasn't debt payoff, that wasn't budgeting. And then I continued to live like that for basically another 2 years so that I could start investing, so that I could start saving. So when I turned 29, 30, I was like, man, guess what? I'm never going to be 26 again. And that's not to say that I can't have an amazing life in my 30s and 40s and 50s. It just means I'm never going to be in my 20s again. And so moving forward, I really want to be able to balance having a good time and looking out for future me. So that's where financially secure YOLO came in, where I take the beginning part of each year, usually January through April, to save and invest very aggressively. So I'm not really going out to eat. I am not like, there's no, it's not my birthday. It's not my partner's birthday. We don't travel. We're just like at home watching Netflix, saving money because we're big outdoors people, like I mentioned earlier. And every summer we're hiking, we're camping, we're traveling, we're going to the beach. So I see my life as in seasons. There's seasons of savings and there's seasons of spending every year. And for me, it happens to be that winter is when I save and summer is when I spend. And for 2022, like 2021 and 2020, obviously, we weren't going out and we weren't traveling. So those were big years of saving. So when 2022 rolled around, we were like, let's spend this money. And I encourage people to kind of sit down and review their years, like you've got kids, so you know when your kids' birthdays are, and those are going to be big spending moments, right? And then you might have a couple of months where you're like, we don't really do anything in September, like it's back to school and we're just like at home, we're cooking and we're not really doing anything. But June we go hard because it's two kids' birthdays plus our anniversary or something. Okay, so September is a month where we can save a lot, and June's a month where we can spend a lot. And that approach to living really helps me because nothing is forever. It doesn't mean I'm going to be in this season of not spending any money for the rest of my life because I know summer is coming up and I'm going to be balling out. So that kind of mindset and that kind of practice really works for me.
I really love that. I love that it's tangible advice for anyone listening right now and or watching is to, look at your year. Like when are your friends, especially your own season of life? It's like your season of life you're in, and then the actual season you're in, and that what that year looks like. And it's like, okay, so there was a time in my 20s, like there was always someone's birthday, and everybody's birthday was a big production. So
Yeah.
you had to save up, and there was a birthday dinner, a party, a trip. It was like, and then now we don't really do that as much. But like you said, my kids, I know everything happens within like 2 months. They have all their birthdays, we have anniversary. And so I think for anyone to sit down and really look at your year, like if you're a person that does celebrate birthdays and goes out or travels or knows you eat out more in the summer, like me,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or Christmas, right? Like around then, and then work backwards to see, okay, how do I make sure I'm prepared financially for that? And then what I'm thinking about, which is funny, is just like I'm like, wow, every month seems like a big spending month.
Mm.
So in those instances, if you're looking at it and you're like, wait a second, like I don't really feel like I have a down month of something happening, it's like, okay, but that's where prioritization comes in. And it is like, okay, maybe you can't go all out for this thing. Maybe you put that limit on it so you can prepare and be financially ready. But I do like sitting and looking at that in that way, your life and your finances.
Yeah, and the whole thing about money is it is flexible. I think oftentimes people think, well, I have to do this. I have to spend money on this trip or I have to spend money on going out to eat. But money is always going to be flexible and it may be harder. There may be an option that's harder because it requires more attention or more work. Like if you are door dashing 5 days a week because you work 70 hours a week and you're really tired, you don't have time to cook. Like, I get it. Door dashing makes a lot of sense. However, maybe there is something that you can do. Maybe there's something else you can change. Like, I always try and tell people find the most stressful areas of your life and start there and say, why is this so stressful? Why is this so hard? Is there anything I can do to make this easier? Is there any help I can ask for? Is there a tool I can use? So, for the people who feel like every single month is insane, try and figure out what's making each month so insane spending wise. And is there one area I can focus on rather than being like, I have to stop all spending? Like, that's not realistic.
Right, right. Which I'm sure you give some great tips about just all of that in your book. So I do want to turn to talk more about the concepts. And, one of the things I know you're big on is the sustainability and basically just being smart, well, not with your money, but also with like how you use the money in the world around you and, like the economy and all those things. So I want to kind of pivot a little bit and talk more about like how can someone be more conscious with their spending, with their investing in such a capitalistic world where sometimes all you see is like the bad in the, in things because you're just like, oh, it's the system. But how can we operate in the system but still do well financially?
Yeah, so I love that you use the word system because I feel like people hear that and they just think, so the system is bigger than me, there's nothing I can do. But what I always say to people is there's nuance. There's nuance within the system, right? So what I really wanted to do with the book was help people think of their money as a tool for change. So, like in my life, I changed my spending and earning habits in my 20s so that I could use money as a tool to pay off my debt. That was an action that helped improve my personal finances. And what the book does is take that as a premise and say, okay, well, how can we then turn money onto the system, right? So, like, how can we change the fact that banks are funding fossil fuel projects, which in turn are creating climate change? Well, you can take your money out of the banks that are funding fossil fuel projects and you can put it in a local credit union, or you can put it in a green bank that funds like solar energy or wind energy. You can use your money as a tool via this individual action. And the book does also talk about collective action, and how we can use legislation to create bigger high level change, but really it is about helping people understand that we do live in a system. We do live under capitalism. Like we do all have to spend money and earn money. And so instead of pretending like we don't live in that system, which I think a lot of people who hope for change do, they kind of live in this la la land of like, well, if things were already different. And the book is very practical. The book's like, but here's where we're at right now. So, like, here's steps you can take to get to different via using your money.
So with that, what's like a step someone can like take if they want to get, put their actions behind their heart, or, they say they want to like, do things that support the environment or be more responsible. Like what are like the next steps they should take in researching where to put their money or what to do next?
Mm-hmm. Well, you should definitely get the book because the book has
Yes,
a whole
green
action
money.
plan. But the kind of immediate thing that's going to have, it's very easy to do and it's going to have a big impact is switch banks. So if you currently bank with Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, or Citibank, taking your money out of those banks is a huge climate action that you can do. And it takes like 10 minutes to switch banks. It's very easy to do. So those four banks are the biggest funders of fossil fuel projects in the United States. So they're funding like fracking in West Texas and deep oil drilling and building new coal plants, which is creating climate change. Fossil fuels are the main problem when it comes to warming up the planet. So taking your money out of those banks affects their bottom line because the fewer customers they have, the less money they have, right? So simply taking your money out and, like I said, putting it in a credit union or putting it in a green bank or putting it in a women-owned bank or a black-owned bank. Like there are a lot of small banks all across the United States that have much more ethical and sustainable business practices than the big four. So that's really a very easy task for anyone who's like, oh yeah, I'd like to just do better with my money. And that's not about where you're spending, where you're shopping, or which I think people get very caught up in the sustainability conversation. This is going to have a much bigger impact and it's way easier to do.
And what do you say to the people who don't feel like they have a lot of money in the first place? So they're like, "What is my $10,000 going to do if I pull it out of Chase?" Right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you get over that emotional kind of hurdle that you're not making a difference?
Somebody once said to me, um, they just asked on Instagram. She was like, hey, I have an old 401k from a job I had like 2 jobs ago. It only has a couple $1,000s in it. Is it even worth trying to go get that 401k and like roll it over into an IRA or into my new 401k? And I just said, hey, if I walked up to you randomly today and offered you $3,000, would you turn me down? Or would you be like, yes, I could definitely use $3,000? I think we live in a world where it's so easy to see the hyper wealthy, right? It's you every day. It's like Elon Musk is in the news doing something crazy. And it's like world's richest person at $200 billion. And we see these crazy numbers. And it's easy to kind of think like that's the norm because those are the people that are constantly in the media or that a lot of people aspire to be. But in reality, the average American household, which is anyone who's over 15 and working and living together. So if you have two parents and a kid who works at Dunkin' Donuts, that's a household. Um, the average American household makes 75 grand a year. Like the average American is not a billionaire, right? So if you're thinking, oh, I only have $10,000, does it really matter if I take that out of Chase? Chase considers that a lot of money, right? And you probably consider $10,000 a lot of money. If I walked up to you and offered you 10 grand, you'd be like, heck yeah. So remember that every dollar that you earn, that you spend, that you invest, that has a very real impact on the world around us. And whether it's $1, $10,000, or $100 million, it all has an impact.
When it comes to value-based spending, I think, obviously earning for a lot of people is an issue and they're not earning enough for their basic needs. But in some instances, people are earning enough, but there's so many things we want to spend our money on. There's the
Hmm.
necessities, of course, and then there are the discretionary things that just make our life happier. So how does one get to a place where they are spending based on their values, and they don't feel like they're depriving themselves? And is that possible? Basically, are we selling people like a dream, saying like, oh, like deprivation is not a part of it? And like, I don't say that. I think sustained gratification or delayed gratification like is something that people have to get used to, because I don't think you can have everything at once that you want.
Hmm.
But how do you walk people and help people through the idea of value-based spending, and putting things off or not having all the things they want and feeling deprived because of it?
Yeah, so I think today in the US, we've all been sold a lie that constant shopping is the way to be happy. Everything is for sale in the United States, right? Everything. And many of us, if you have disposable cash, can have anything you want very quickly because we have 1 day shipping, 2 day shipping, and you can DoorDash your favorite meal every single night. You can overnight yourself a cute dress that you saw on Amazon. Like it's very easy to satisfy a whim that you've had. And that leads to not only overconsumption, which is bad for the environment, but it actually turns out is really bad for us mentally. And it doesn't lead us to feeling satisfied. It instead creates this kind of endless competition that we can't win with ourselves, because if there's always something else that you can buy, that means there's always something about yourself that you can change, or that you should be, you're kind of like a project that doesn't have an end. You can always be thinner, you can always be hotter, you can always be richer. And so if you never reach a point of satisfaction, you're never satisfied. So I think a lot of people, the first step when we talk about values based budgeting, they hear deprivation. You have to stop buying things that make you happy. But really, what we're saying is, does buying things all the time make you happy? Just think about it for a second. Or does spending time with your family make you happy? Does spending time in your garden make you happy? Does going to the movies with your husband make you happy? Like, what are the things that actually make you happy? Is it having a full cart on Amazon? Or is it spending the day with your kids at the playground? And once you begin to identify the things that you really value that actually make you happy, then the question becomes, okay, how do I get these? Sometimes you're going to have to spend money. Absolutely. Like every time I eat Thai food, I'm like, oh my God, God bless Thailand. This food is delicious. And I've attempted to make it myself a couple of times. It's never as good. It's never as good. So I'm just like, I'm going to buy Thai food and that's going to be amazing. But other things that bring me joy, going on walks with friends, rewatching Parks and Rec, which I own on DVD. I'm learning how to embroider, and that makes me really happy because it's this creative outlet for my hands and my brain. So, how can we get joy and how can we get our needs met without spending all the time is really the question.
Especially when you were talking about platforms and social media at the beginning of the conversation, and I've now stumbled into like the organization
Oh,
content
yes.
creators on Instagram, and they're from TikTok. They kind of, they're all over. And I swear, like sometimes when I look at it, I'm like, my gosh, like maybe I do need that thing, like even me, like who I don't really like to shop, but when I'm looking at the person and the persons and how organized everything is, and then there is a thing for everything, like literally things I didn't even think
Hmm.
existed. There's a holder for that. There's a cutter for that. And I'm just like, wow, like, and so I can see, and then you'll see all the people in the comments like that are amazed, just like I am, and they're just
Hmm.
expressing that, and I could just see like, but how like does the average person, if they're going like they can't like literally like the person will have like 50 Amazon boxes like coming, and they're opening it, and everyone's just, and it's like, people watch the people who eat the,
Oh,
what's
yeah.
that called,
The
when they eat food.
mukbangs.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's like you get satisfaction of like just watching someone eat, which I don't get,
Mhm.
but whatever's your thing. And then now it's like the satisfaction even I get. I'm like, wow, look at like opening the boxes, like all these gadgets that this person has. And, I don't mean to like, I'm sure they're making a lot of money doing that and it's part of like
Mhm.
their business model. But I'm just like, wow, no wonder why it's so hard for some people because if you're in a place where you have a budget and all your other goals are completed, then I can see if you're just a organized person why that is wonderful. Like I have a budget to buy these things. But if you're someone who's already struggling and you see stuff like that, I mean,
Mhm.
how can you get ahead?
Yeah, and that's exactly it, is that so much of what we see now is on social media, and so much of what we see on social media is an ad. Even if they're not being upfront, like, hey, I'm trying to sell you this thing, if they're displaying how they're using it and they're creating that desire in you, that jealousy maybe, for you to have what they have, that's an ad. And that is nonstop on social media, which creates that kind of endless pit that I was talking about of I need to buy, 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 buy. But I really encourage people to look back through their credit card statements or their bank statements if they find themselves making frequent impulse purchases, and then look around their house and see how much of that they're actually using and how much of it is actually just in a drawer somewhere or already has been thrown out or they don't even know where it went because it never worked right or whatever it is. Like we buy a lot of actual junk because things are not well made, or a lot of these small things on social media, they're made out of plastic, they break very easily, or they don't fit in the drawer because our drawer is a different size than the drawer that we saw being organized on TikTok, right? And so it's kind of, it creates this endless race that you can't win. And so it's really powerful to sit down and say like, okay, actually I'm going to not run this race. I'm going to opt out. And I'm only going to opt in when it's something that I know I need, that I know I want to use, that I've bought before, made me really happy. Just at some point, you really have to say, I can't compete with the endless algorithm. Like the algorithm never turns off, and there's always someone making a new video, but you're one person and you can't compete with the 50 billion users on TikTok. And that's okay. That's not deprivation. That's not loss. That's you reclaiming control over your own life.
And it's so important too to have other like people, our friends, our community, the people like around us that influence us and we kind of bounce things off of. And it doesn't have to be specific like money conversations like, oh, did you budget today to your best friend, right? But I know there's that joke like walk into Target, you only wanted like eggs, you walk out spending
Yeah.
400 and it is funny because I think that that's an experience I've had. A lot of people have that, but imagine if like the only circle of people or influence around you like that's normal, which it kind of is, but that's all you heard was like it's all right, it happens. Versus hearing like these conversations with us and other people and realizing like okay, that might happen a lot, but it's also part of the system keeping you kind of, wanting you to keep doing that. And it's okay
Mm-hmm.
to be like, you know what, though? Like, that's actually not something I can continue to do if I'm trying to reach financial freedom or independence. And so, like, I know community and building community is a big part of also like something that you're passionate about. And so to me, that's part of it. It's like, what's the environment around you normalizing? And can we,
Yes.
normalize a bit of, if we say no to something, it doesn't mean we are completely miserable, depriving ourselves. We're just saying, no, not yet. No, it's not the right time.
Yes, yeah, 100%. I love how you phrase that of, what are the people around you kind of establishing as the norm, or what are they asking you to spend, or what are they asking you to save, right? And this is why I think financial community is so important to build. Like you need to have people in your life, and I talk about this in the book, that you can discuss your financial goals with and your financial fears with. And you need to have people that you can support on their financial journey and that can support you. So one of my favorite stories for the book was this mom who found a babysitting co-op. So it was her and other parents in her neighborhood, so like her direct neighbors and people a couple streets over, who instead of paying for childcare, they organized together and just swapped babysitting. So it would be like, okay, Sarah and Jose are going to watch my daughter Jenny for 6 hours this weekend while my husband and I go on a hike or something, and then I owe Sarah and Jose 6 hours of babysitting. So there's no exchange of money, but we're getting our childcare needs met. And people are able to go out on date night or go to, like, the parent teacher conference or whatever it is. And I loved that because that's an example of creativity in our budget that gives us back control over our spending and still allows us to get our needs met.
Yes, and I think the community aspect, some things are coming up as you were talking, like that may be barriers, or we could talk through about what people can, um, think about in their lives. But, I think trust and communicating to the people around you and talking to them is important, because a lot of us, especially since the pandemic and even before, the way our homes are kind of designed, especially depending on the city you live in, there's a lot of distrust, in the world. And, like, you
Hmm.
don't always know your neighbor. Like, I remember knowing when I was younger a lot of my neighbors, and I know my neighbors now, but, there's some where it's just like, okay, like,
Yeah.
but I think understanding, talking, and you just never know, like, who that person is or what they do, or what skill they have. Because one of the things that I would need help with in my daily life, right, is my daughter. So I have 3 kids. My youngest is a girl, and her hair. So I'm not someone who, like, is a natural hair doer, if that's a
Hmm.
word. But, like, it's a thing, like, in the black community, especially for, like, black children, girls, hair takes a lot of time.
Hmm.
And so, it's one of those things where, I was never into dolls and practice on braiding and doing hair. So with my daughter, it's a lot. And I know some moms, it's like they can braid, it's nothing. Like, they get their hair done, they
Yeah.
take joy in it. And I was just thinking when you were talking, I need to find a mom I can, exchange, like, what skill can I provide you or do for you so that you can, like, braid my daughter's hair, and save me those hours or that stress of figuring that out. But in the same regard, I think what's happening is one of the reasons why I maybe wouldn't do that and just, like, pay someone is it's it's also expected, like, kind of like you're supposed to do you should enjoy
Mm.
and do your daughter's hair. Like, what do you mean you don't want to do it?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that even that responsibility of, like, raising children, or, like, not wanting to cook or clean and doing and kind of offsetting that. I feel like for women, that expected what you should do also prevents us maybe from reaching out and exchanging those in kind services. What do you think?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good point. I do think, and I'm not a mom, but I do think that we in the US have crazy expectations for parents in general and especially for moms. There's a woman named Amy Westerfeld who has a quote that I think about all the time. She's like, we expect, and I'm paraphrasing, she says, we expect women to parent like they don't have jobs and to work like they're not moms. And it is this duology that a lot of women contain of, like, I'm my own person and I am a mom and I have to, like, go to work and I have to work out and I have to clean my house and I have to bake for the bake sale and I have to, like, volunteer at my kids' school and I have to drop my kids off so they don't take the bus because I'm the perfect parent. And it's an impossible thing to actually be. You can't be the perfect parent and the perfect employee and the perfect, like, independent woman, right? But we expect women to do that. And so I do think that's a very good point. I think it's well worth, like, discussing within your own life. If you feel like people are putting those expectations on you or judging you for something, and just really owning, like, it's not a fault to ask for help. It's not a fault to share responsibility. It's not a fault to exchange time and skills and services. It actually makes my life richer and makes my kids' life richer, right? Like, now they get to, if it's like you do have a neighbor, let's say, who can do your daughter's hair, and now that neighbor does your daughter's hair for, let's say, 5 years, and now all of a sudden that's Aunt Jackie, and, like, my daughter now has a great relationship with Aunt Jackie, and I got an hour free, or, or however long it takes each week to ever, literally whatever. And I don't know, I bring Jackie a lasagna once a week, or like, for the exchange. But I actually think asking for help and breaking down these really harmful expectations make our lives richer and can also make our exchanges richer and more exciting.
Yeah, I totally agree. One of the things that I know you navigate your finances with is with a partner. And so I would love to like just understand for someone listening who wants to take this journey, get more intentional with their finances, make some changes that are more based on their values in terms of spending and even earning money or travel. If they're, doing it by yourself is one thing because you just consult with yourself and work through
Hmm.
those things. But how do you do that with a partner who has maybe a different type of job, who's not an entrepreneur, or just has different values and different goals? Like, what does that look like?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I just said to my partner, so I've been with my partner over 10 years, and we have very similar value systems, but it shows up in very different ways. And so, literally 2 days ago, I was just like, what if I, just like, if I love you so much, but if I was single, we wouldn't have to have this conversation. Because I wanted to do something with money that made so much sense to me. And he was like, why would you do that? I was like, how could you not see what I see? And I love him so much and I don't want to be single. But yeah, I mean, the challenge of being partnered, being married, right, is like trying to find a way to grow at roughly the same rate as another person indefinitely, which is so bananas and like so fun. But so my partner, to give a little recap, my partner and I don't share any bank accounts, so we don't have any shared investments. We don't have a shared checking or savings. And I know a lot, especially women on the internet and in our financial space, also don't share bank accounts. And they say it's because, you know, there are high instances of like financial abuse for women, like against women. And 99% of domestic abuse cases have an aspect of financial abuse to them. But I will just say that, like, the reason that my partner and I don't share bank accounts is because I am a nitty gritty financial control freak. And it would absolutely destroy our relationship if I was like, hey, I noticed you spent $7 on Tuesday. That wasn't in the budget. What'd you spend that on? What's going on there? Which I would want to do because I control my own budget very tightly. I enjoy getting into my spreadsheets and like doing projections and just like hunting down, oh, they overcharged me for this. Let me call and negotiate that. I enjoy that. My partner does not. He wants to think about money as infrequently as possible. He's just sort of like, this is so boring. This is so stressful. So for us to have completely combined finances would be a disaster. But what we do, and we have done very successfully for the last 8 years, is we do a once a month money date where we sit down, we look at all of our accounts together. There's total transparency. He can see how much I have in savings, how much I have in investments. I can see the same for him. We Venmo each other for shared expenses. And then we'll talk about anything that we have coming up that we are going to do as a couple. Like we recently attended a wedding, and so we had to pay for the Airbnb. We talked about like gas expenses to drive down there. And then anything that one of us wants to do that we just think the other one should be aware of. Like, hey, I think I'm going to buy, he's a musician and he has oh god, I can't, a loop pedal, I think, so that like the guitar, when he's playing the guitar, he can record himself and then the sound will play over and over and then he can play a different sound on top, is I think how that works. And it broke and he was like, oh, I'm going to need to buy a new loop pedal. It's probably going to be $100. And I was like, great. That's coming out of his bank account. That's not mine. I'm clearly not even sure how the loop pedal works, but like it's important to him and he's just letting me know. He's not asking for permission and he doesn't need to. And if I want to go out and be like, I'm going to spend $1,000 on Thai food, that's my prerogative. That's my choice. And that works well for us because we know exactly what's going on in the other person's life, but we don't have to sort of like bend ourselves into the other person's view of finances.
Mm. And how does that work? Says, I mean, it in theory, like obviously in practice, it's working for you, right? And in theory, it sounds like, yeah, of course that would work. Like we keep things separate for shared things. We, just divvy it up how it should be. And uh, I wonder, like, that works, like you said, because you have similar values. And he's probably, even though he looks at money differently, like he doesn't want to think about it and budget to a T, he probably is financially sound himself. Like he's not probably, there's some people,
Mhm.
right? Like they're together and the person is spending a lot and getting into a lot
Yeah.
of debt. And then that's putting a burden and stress and causing issues. It sounds like because maybe that's not the case with you guys, like you both are not in that scenario, that it works that way.
Yeah. So I will say when we got together 10 and a half years ago, he did have a lot of student loan debt. He had like $65,000 in student loan debt. So there was a time where I was debt free and he still had debt. And I was like, okay, here's how I paid off my debt. You can pick up a side hustle. And if we do this, that, and the other thing. And he was like, Kara, I'm making extra payments every month. I have a plan. Like, you need to chill. So we have had conflict in the past around money, but now we're both, consumer debt free. We don't have student loan debt. And our values aligned. Like, he's not a big shopper, and he's also okay, like, delaying immediate gratification for a bigger payoff. So we just moved to Massachusetts, and a trip that we both want to take is to Iceland because it's a pretty short flight. I think it's shorter to get to Iceland than it is to get to California, which always blows my mind. And so we were just talking about, oh, maybe we'll do that next fall, a year from now. So what do we need to save for that? Like, how much should you save? How much should I save? And so we have those discussions. But because, yeah, there is no major issue between the two of us, I would say this is much easier. If you do have a major issue between you and your partner, I think what's the good approach there is going to be not talking numbers, instead talking experiences and values. If someone is really struggling to spend money, if someone's like cheap, right, or kind of a tightwad, why? Is there a financial fear there? Is there a scarcity mindset? Is there an experience they had growing up where they felt lack and now they're really holding tight to money? Or conversely, if someone is spending, 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 why? Is that making them feel like it's in control because they feel out of control in another area of life? So if you find yourself with a big gap between your romantic partner, I think, like, put the numbers aside for a second. Don't even talk accounts. Like, get at the emotions of it.
Yeah, and the other thing that just came out, which may cause issues, is like maybe if the income disparity, like how much people
Mm,
make is different, and then they're expected to split things. And so,
yeah.
right, and if that for, I know a lot of women maybe have gone through this because maybe the man is earning more, and then like, but you're expected to pay, but you're left with not much at the end of the month for your own goals.
Yeah, yeah. And I will say I'm the breadwinner, and I've been the breadwinner in my relationship for the last like 5 years. And I will say I do think an element of this is luck. Like, my partner does not care. He's like, babe, when are you retiring me? Literally last night, I was like, oh, I'd love to retire you. He's like, I'd love for you to retire me. So I do think that's maybe a little bit of a just lucky personality break there. But yeah, that can be a very challenging situation for couples.
Right, that you should talk through or at least be aware of what's happening.
Hmm.
Okay. Kara, please, I want everyone to go get your book. Please tell us the name of it again. Who should pick this up and read it, and where they can get it.
Yes, so the name of the book is Green Money: How to Reduce Waste, Build Wealth, and Create a Better Future for All. And it's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Bookshop, Target. It's very easy to find, which is great. And you can find me on the internet. I'm very Googleable, is what I always tell people. Kara Perez, type it into Google. But I'm also on Instagram at We Bravely Go. TikTok is the same. And I'm on YouTube at Bravely Go. And really, I'm a long form girly. Coming back to our conversation we had earlier, I'm a long form girly. So I also have a website, bravelygo.co, that has articles and a bunch of stuff on it for folks.
And we will link all of that in the show notes. And by the way, it's Kara with a K.
Yes, yes, with a K, not with a C.
Yeah, so I'll link all that in the show notes so you can check out her work and find her book. But this was such a great conversation and catch up. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh my gosh, this was delightful. Thank you for having me.